Hello, and welcome to the Story Partners podcast. We are your hosts, Walt and Annie Manus. We're so glad you're here.
We're a team of storytellers who seek to tell stories that point people to Jesus.
We met Jaleesa McCreary a few years ago through a mutual friend, and she is such a delight to hang out with. We connected with each other easily on a number of different topics, but I remember sitting across from her at a Mexican restaurant and listening to her share her personal story, and I was so intrigued. Jaleesa's whole life was pointing toward a career in opera, until the day that path came to an abrupt end. She had no idea what her future would look like when, as she puts it, her one gift was gone. This episode is called Singing a New Song.
I'm Jaleesa McCreary. I am a worship leader and worship team director for our worship ministry at the Austin Stone here in Austin, Texas. Growing up, I was known for singing. It was expected that I would go out for a solo in choir. People knew I had voice lessons multiple days a week. I would sing the national anthem at the football games. I was known for singing. That was my thing. Whenever teachers would kind of pick me out and say, you should do this solo or you need to come do these voice lessons, the music that was put in front of me, by and large, was opera. My dream was to join some kind of touring opera company. I thought that would have been amazing. So it entered my life at an early age, and then I had big aspirations for where it would lead. I remember being 13 and in a youth group and really feeling like I needed to follow Jesus and responding to an altar call. But on the other side of that, there was no discipleship. I raised my hand and said I wanted to follow Jesus, but there was no one that came alongside me to teach me what that looked like. I remember one conversation about baptism, and then nothing really went from there. I ended up getting baptized when I was 24. So it took a long time for anybody to come alongside me and teach me. So all of those years that I was kind of fumbling through it, I was pretty self-righteous and legalistic, and I would have called that a relationship with Jesus. I think growing up, when it came to singing in church, I didn't really understand the value of it or the purpose of it. I had no idea why we were doing it. No one ever took the time to explain that. I always loved singing, but I didn't know it had any actual place. I didn't realize what it meant to your relationship with Jesus or that it was genuine worship. It took a shift for me when I started thinking about going to college. I really wanted to study voice, and my parents were like, you will make no dollars, and so we can't help you get a degree in music, especially not voice. And the joke is on them because I don't think I enjoy anything that will make you a lot of money. I just don't. So I ended up going to school for journalism, and they also don't make a lot of money. And so I started that program, and I really didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. There was just a lot about it that ended up not appealing to me. And so we reached a point, I was probably a sophomore, and my parents called me up and they were like, we can tell you're super unhappy. You've wanted to do this music thing. Go ahead and switch your degree and we'll just figure it out. And I was so pumped about that. So that was a turning point for me where I thought, okay, I'm going to get to really take this seriously. So I auditioned, I got into the voice program. I'm a terrible sight reader, music sight reader. I'm really slow at it. And they let me in anyway, which was so great. So I ended up getting into the vocal performance program at Texas State University and kind of hopped into theory classes. And then when it came time to do the voice classes, I a little bit hit a snag with some vocal issues. I was having a lot of trouble singing, and I thought, well, I've just been doing it so much. Maybe I just wasn't doing it very healthily, or I've just been doing it too much. I've worn myself out. But I was having a hard time singing for a long period of time. My throat would just hurt really badly. And then as time went on, it probably took like a year or so to figure out what was going on. But as time went on, it started to affect my speaking voice. I couldn't have conversations for a long amount of time. It would hurt to talk. It would hurt to give a presentation in a class or anything like that. And so I would go to the doctor and they would say, I think it's allergies, take this allergy pill and gargle salt water and do this thing and that thing. And I reached a point where I was like, this has to be more than that. I've had allergies all my life. And I ended up asking if I could see a specialist. And so I was referred to an ENT. And he said, well, it could just be like vocal nodes and those can go away with diet and rest and, but I'll send you to a laryngologist just in case. And so I went to that guy and he was like, you have a very large cyst on your vocal cords. And like, we have to get that removed immediately. Like you have to get surgery like next week. I was like, oh, absolutely not. Which I remember being in that appointment with my dad and the doctor saying, hey, we have to operate next week. And I was like, oh no, I won't be able to do that. And my dad was like, she'll be here. And I was like, I'm super busy. And he was like, we will come back for the surgery. Like, we're not going to do that. The doctor said, hey, we have to do this for your health and longevity, but a career in singing or a career where you're speaking a ton is just not in the cards for you, which was terrible because I just switched to a vocal performance program or I was going to have to go back to this journalism degree and neither equaled vocal rest. So, I mean, that really freaked me out. The idea of just not being able to do that and not knowing what my voice was going to sound like on the other side was really terrifying. I went in and had that vocal surgery. They ended up finding that while I did have one large cyst, it was creating another one on the other side of my vocal fold, so they were hitting each other. There was initially 2 weeks where I wasn't allowed to talk. And then I finally sat down with a voice therapist or speech therapist, and she was like, okay, say hello. And I couldn't do it. And that I was like, it didn't work. I can't talk. I can't even talk anymore. And she was like, it's okay. You haven't used the muscle in 2 weeks. That's totally normal. Just like try again. But it was so much more difficult than I anticipated it being just to speak that I was like, oh my gosh, they're right. Like I don't know how much I'm going to be able to do. So I was definitely struggling with the idea of like, oh, I just am not going to sing. I've done this forever. And I thought I was finally on the path that I wanted to be on of making it my career. And now I just can't do it at all. And then it felt like my one gift was gone. I felt like that was my one thing and I just couldn't do it anymore.
Did you know that along with this podcast, Story Partners makes short documentary films? We do. Come check us out on YouTube and subscribe to our channel to see the latest films as they release.
I started doing contract work for a tech company. I was like doing invoices and scheduling meetings and things like that for them because I didn't have to use my voice. I remember getting maybe a couple months into post-op and them showing me, they scope you. So you have like a mic that goes down your throat and you sing while it's in there and you watch on a screen like your vocal muscles move. And the doctor was like, wow, this recovery is going really well. And he was like, you sound great. Like your vocal cords look so healthy. He was like, if I didn't know any better, if I hadn't been the person with the laser in there, I would have thought no one had ever done anything to your vocal cords. This is amazing. And so I'm like, okay, great. Well, what does that mean? And he's like, oh, it just means it's healing up great, And so I'm like, cool. So singing? And he's like, yeah, no. I was so sad. Like I remember sitting there with him and being like, thank you so much for your time. And then getting in my car, just bawling my eyes out because I think I felt like I'd been doing everything right in terms of recovery. And I'm like, I let you, do the stupid surgery. Like there should be something good for me. Like, where's the gold at the end of the rainbow kind of thing? And I was just really sad. So I think the overwhelming feelings were confusion for sure, because it felt like it was messing up my life plan, and sadness because the thing that I loved was being taken off the table. I got in the car and I called my mom and told her what the doctor had said. And she was like, well, A lot of things happen this side of heaven that we don't understand. And we may think it looks like one thing, but we should ask God what he really means by all of this. And I didn't really have a relationship to prayer, but that was the first time in my life where I was like, I have a question I need God to answer very specifically, and I'm going to start talking to him about it. And then my roommates and I were like, we need to find a church. Like, it was just such a turning point for me. It was such a growing thing for my faith because I think I was figuring it out. I hadn't put a ton of time into figuring it out. I think my voice singing was a distraction from that. I could follow that trajectory and not look back. But having that taken was an opportunity for me to turn toward Jesus and be like, cool, now I have nothing. And apparently you're in charge of my life. So what do we do, It was 2 years of recovery. I think it varies for different people who get this surgery. But so I went from not being able to speak at all to being allotted a few minutes every day where I was allowed to talk, and my roommates had their stopwatch and they were checking in on me. I went from that kind of chunk of time, which was the first few months with a speech therapist, into vocal therapy. So I was meeting with a vocal professor from UTSA. He was like teaching classes and leading choirs and like prepping students for careers in opera. And somehow, I genuinely can't remember how I found this person, but he ended up meeting with lots of singers who had vocal injuries along the way. And I guess opera just singing beats up your voice. And classical, you got to do some weird stuff. So I'm sure he just saw it a lot and just had a ton of experience with singers with vocal injuries. It's kind of crazy. So I would go in and see him for, an hour every other week or whatever. And we focused on jazz because it's so easy on the voice and it's really free and really fun. Whereas opera is so rigid, like you have to hit your marks and it's very specific and your voice has to sound a certain way. And it's strenuous in a different way that I couldn't physically do anymore. I eventually reached a point where it was like, you can sing a full song and you're not in pain. And, this is a great thing. And so both he and my surgeon were really encouraging of like, you did do everything we asked you to do. And now you've reached a point where like, you can sing along to a song in the car, still saying like a vocal career was off the table. But I did reach a point where I was like, oh, I'm healthy enough to sing. My roommates and I had started going to a church, and I was realizing through going to this church how little of a relationship with Jesus I had. I'm supposed to be connected to this thing, but I don't really think I'm doing it right. And to hear my college roommates tell the story, it's sort of hilarious because they're like, you seemed like you had lost your mind. But I was in service and I'm just like crying the whole service. I don't even remember what happened in the service. No songs, no sermon. And we got in the car that night. We lived like 30 minutes. Our school was 30 minutes from where this church was. They were like, why are you crying? Like, what is the deal? And I said, I'm not good, but you never told me. And they were like, what do you mean? And that's all I could say was like, I'm not good. You guys never told me. And they were like, well, everybody likes you. Like, you have a lot of friends. Like, people like you. Like, I don't understand what the deal is. But that was just the feeling I kept having was like, I'm not good. Nobody told me I have to change. And I feel like there have been a few experiences like that in my life where everything else goes away and it's just one phrase. I'm like, oh, hi, Holy Spirit. And so it was a moment like that where I was like, I've got to keep going to this church place and I want to start reading the Bible. And that genuinely started to become my focus. I started to read the Bible with girls from school to the point where I was skipping classes, and I went home one Christmas and my mom was like, how's your GPA? And I was like, and she was like, here's my guess. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. I think it's so great you're skipping class to read the Bible with your friends. We think it's awesome. Find another time to do it and go to class. And I was like, oh, okay, I understand. So I think I felt pretty distracted from voice because I was so consumed with Jesus. And as I was pursuing knowing him more and just being involved in a church. This was my first experience of biblical community or being invested in a local church. So starting to do that, I started to realize, oh, I'm going to this church, I'm learning more about Jesus, and then in my spare time, I'm sitting with girls and reading the Bible with them. I wasn't even thinking about singing at that point. I was like, oh, I want to be with people. I want to be reading the Bible with people. I want to be investing in people. I want to see them grow and help them figure out who they are in Jesus and what are they passionate about and all of that. It didn't feel like well, now I'm stuck doing this. It felt like I have this whole new love that it's been replaced with. And so I don't feel like, oh, you just totally, wrenched something away from me and ruined my life. It was incredibly difficult and really sad and really hard. But also once I was on the other side of vocal recovery and people were giving me the thumbs up of like, wow, it's so healthy and you can't have a career in it, but like, isn't it great? You can sing a little bit now. Like once I had reached that point, I kind of thought, okay, cool. Well, now I'm doing this other thing. So it felt like one had sort of replaced the other and it wasn't really a matter of fair or not fair. It was just like God changed the trajectory. So the way that I started leading worship was literally I was on a road trip with a friend and I was singing along to a song in the car. And then she told a guy at our church that I could sing. And he was like, would you come sing worship with me in students ministry? And I was like, excuse me? Like, I was like, I don't do that anymore. How do you even know I sing? Because at this point, it's not a part of my identity. Like people don't know I sing. He asked me to do background vocals for him in our students ministry for 2 weeks. And so I was like, I can give you 2 Sundays, no big deal. And then he was like, okay, just like, can you keep coming back? So 2 weeks turned into 2 years of serving with him in this ministry, which talking to him, he's a worship pastor in LA now, but he was like, yeah, I remember that first rehearsal you left and the band was like, she's kind of like opera-y, but like, I think it could be pretty good. So I'm like, yeah, I was a classical singer for years. So there was, some work that needed to be done. So I did background vocals with him. It turned into 2 years. And I think it was that pairing of discipleship and music that I didn't know that's what worship was. And so I always joke that I was his intern, even though he was the worship intern for the church, because I was learning everything he was learning just through serving with him. So I did that. It was, I went from background vocals to like slowly leading songs and learning how to build set lists and all of those things. And then I transitioned from serving with him there to start serving at one of our campuses in our adult services. And even then I was new to that worship leader. So I started with background vocals. So it's all like easier, and vocally I didn't have to be like too strong because I'm a supporting vocal. And so I kind of started there. And then that worship leader sat me down and was like, I want you to lead this new song. It's called Oceans. And I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. And he was like, oh, well, I actually meant that you're going to in a couple of weeks. And I was like, oh, I don't want to. And so I ended up working on it, which we joke now. He was like, your catchphrase was, are you sure? He was like, as if I don't think about these things before I ask people to do them. Like, yes, I'm sure. So I started leading songs with him. And I think he just saw something in me, which is really kind, and just started investing in me. And so I would get more and more opportunities to lead more songs. And then eventually I would lead a whole service without him there. So I think over time, my vocal muscle was getting more and more strengthened. And we would even joke because there would be notes that I would hit and they'd be like, oh, that's like quirky. It has a lot of character. I'm like, it's scar tissue. Like I can't replicate it. It's just the vocal muscle. And so I went from sometimes filling in for him with his band into eventually leading my own band where I didn't have any other worship leaders. So I was leading all 5 to 6 songs every Sunday. And that like totally grew my vocal longevity because I did that for like 4 years. So I feel like God was really gracious to kind of give me slower opportunities to where I didn't have to come in full force. I couldn't physically, just to build me up to where I am now 11 years later, where I'm like, oh, I can do it no problem, which is crazy. I'm like, to go from it hurt to talk to you can't have a career in singing to this is what I do, like sometimes like 4 times a week is crazy. It's wild. I have something to give to people in art and creativity and music, but I'm also rallying them around something that's bigger, which honestly felt really relieving. Like I'm not rallying people around my gift, I'm not rallying people around what I can do, but I'm rallying people around truth and theology in the person of Jesus. And so I think it felt really freeing to know this isn't a picked apart performance, but it's an opportunity to like hold up Jesus in front of people and get them excited about him. And I think I just learned to do that through doing it over and over and over again and making some mistakes and then trying again. But yeah, I think at this point, I'm like, I love this way more than I ever loved opera because it's way better than performing and it's eternal. So I feel great about that, you know? Our church is fairly large. There's 6 congregations, campuses across the city of Austin. And I lead at one of them weekly. So pretty much every Sunday, I'm the worship leader there up front, leading the band, leading services. And then my kind of 9 to 5, what I'm doing during the week, I have the privilege, honestly, of getting to shepherd and serve the worship leaders from those other congregations. So I get to invest in them spiritually. I get to check in on their personal health. We have 4 team goals: be healthy, mature, priestly, and creative. And so I get to kind of check in with them on those things in particular and make sure they feel equipped to do their work, and whole as they can be spiritually. How are they doing in their home? How are they doing in their friendships? How are they doing in their leadership? So that takes up the bulk of my weeks, is managing worship at our campus, but then also overseeing all of these folks who are leading at all of our other campuses, which is really fun. It's a role that gets to kind of touch every single campus, even though I can't be at all of those places every week. I get to kind of be their cheerleader and just kind of pour into them. I have felt like it's been interesting to explain to people how exhausting leading worship is. So they're like, you get up there and you sing some songs, like, well, why do you need a nap? But I feel like it takes all of me to do the job. And again, you know, thinking about what I'm doing during the week, in addition to shepherding our worship leaders, I'm also leading worship multiple times throughout a week. There's random events that are happening across our church all the time. So it's more than just Sunday. So I'm doing it pretty consistently, and it's tiring because it's emotional, physical, and spiritual. When I'm on stage leading worship, I feel like I have been given the ability to just sense what God wants to do in a room. And if I come into a room to lead and people are like really hyped up and ready to go, I don't even necessarily take that at face value. I'm like, you could seem really excited to be here and not be feeling great. Like, I let him kind of tell me what things need to be said, or even what things not to say that I maybe said in the service before, just based on the sense of what I feel like he's doing in the room, which is an interesting thing as a person who disciples worship leaders, because it feels super intangible. That's a hard thing to teach to people. It's a hard thing for me to articulate even now. From my vantage point on stage, I see people completely stoic and not wanting to worship. I see people weeping. I see people really excited and happy to be there. I see people coming in late and they're frantic and tired. I feel like I'm constantly like checking the emotional pulse in the room. And even what I will say on a Sunday morning will shift between services for what I see in the people in front of me, but then also just what I sense God doing. One of my favorite things to remind our congregations of is how attentive he is to the specifics of your story. You know, again, recognizing my limitations as a shepherd, when that many people get in a room, I am so ill-equipped to meet every single one of them where they are, or to give every single one of them what they need. I don't know all their stories. I don't know. But I'm so comforted by the fact that he's a perfect shepherd. And so I always tell them, no matter what you brought into the room today, you're seen exactly where I may not know what's happening in your life, but you're in the presence of someone who does and has the perfect ability to steer it. And so you can hand him your burdens. You can let him lead you and guide you. So praise the Lord. He's our shepherd. I think an overarching theme in my story with the Lord, I think that he has changed me from being a person who is like a mega planner and has this exact precise idea of what life is supposed to look like. He has shaped me into a person who really loves the idea of stewarding the mysteries of God, because he just does things. And if you lean into it, it blows your mind in some really profound ways. He knows exactly what he's doing. And if I don't get so attached to what my plans are for my life, I'm going to have a lot more fun, and I'm going to become a lot more trusting, and I'm going to look a lot more like him. And I'm a control person. So I think him constantly keeping in front of me, I know what I'm doing. You can submit to me. You can follow me, and we're going to be okay, has been a major theme and takeaway in my story. I think that the motivation has shifted in that I recognize that the work has already been accomplished, and all God is asking for is me to do my best. And I had a supervisor a long time ago in a season when I was really stressed out and overwhelmed. And he said, I think you just need to hear that your best is good enough for Jesus. And that has really stuck with me, because it feels like that pressure of like, I want to give and I want to serve and I want to do X, Y, and Z. And I don't even know what I think comes on the other side, like, or else what? I don't know. Nothing is going to fall apart. He's the great shepherd. But I think, the motivation of I'm just going to do my best, and he knows my frame and remembers I'm dust. And he's going to give me sleep and rest and water and food and provide for me. And I'm just going to show up in him however I feel like he's asking me to do that, and obey and lay things down, and just trust that it's good enough for him, because he's actually doing the heavy lifting. That has changed me completely.
I really love Jaleesa's story. I think it's cool how at one point it looked like the one thing she loved and was really gifted in was completely taken from her. But the reality was that God wanted to repackage that gift and give it back to her as something even better than the original gift. A gift that, instead of pointing to herself, points to him. We know it doesn't always work out this way, and sometimes the Lord takes something away and he never gives it back. And that's really difficult, and it's hard for us to understand sometimes. Each story is so different and unique, and God is accomplishing his purposes in unique ways in each of our stories. But I think Jaleesa's story is a really encouraging one, just to remember that he's working and he's doing things that we don't know about. When I personally reflect on Jaleesa's story, I feel like the overwhelming theme that I hear the Lord saying is, no matter what happens in your story, I want you to know you can trust me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. We hope that it encourages you this week.
The Story Partners podcast is still very new, but we're already seeing the Lord use it to encourage people. If you've reached out to us to tell us what a specific episode has meant to you, thank you. It really does encourage Walt and I as we continue in this work. If you're willing, we would love for you to take a moment to rate and review the podcast for us. This is a huge help to us as we continue to try to get these stories out to more people.
We also wanted to give a big thanks to Elijah Delgado for providing our show music.
Elijah is a local artist here in Austin and also our friend. So be sure to check out his work wherever you stream your music.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope to see you on the next one. Until then.